Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome. This microphone is hanging around. Kevin Costner asked me to send his best wishes to you. He couldn't make it himself. This event tonight is co-sponsored by the Kennedy School of Government and Lowell House at Harvard College. I'm Marvin Kalb, director of the Shorenstein-Barone Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy here at the Kennedy School, and speaking on behalf of Lowell House is Peter Jordan. Peter?
Thank you, Marvin Kalb. Hello? Well, I'll just yell, okay? Thank you, Marvin Kalb, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to thank the Warner Brothers for allowing us to screen the film JFK, Heather Parse Campion of the Institute of Politics Forum, and the co-masters of Lowell House, Professor William and Mary Lee Foster, for co-sponsoring this event. Each year, Lowell House, one of the undergraduate colleges of Harvard University, with funds provided by the Ford Foundation, invites a distinguished guest to dine with a small group of undergraduates. At Ford dinners, guests speak on topics of their own interest, whether or not they relate to their professional field. Past Ford dinner guests have included activist Cesar Chavez, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, writer Harold Broadkey, and Robert Redford, who came not as an actor, but as an environmentalist. This year, Lowell House is pleased to host film director Oliver Stone. In making his film interpretation of the events of November 22, 1963, Mr. Stone has engendered one of the most bitter feuds in recent cultural memory. The film has been called everything from a masterpiece to the big lie, and Mr. Stone himself has been both praised and attacked, even to the point of being accused of treason. That the film and the furor surrounding it have impacted upon the society is evidenced by a renewed political movement for the public disclosure of government files relating to the assassination, files currently locked away until the year 2029. That the film has entered into the American popular consciousness is displayed by its reduction to parody, as I am. Displayed by its reduction to parody on Saturday Night Live. We believe serious questions should be posed in a manner befitting their importance. That is why we asked Oliver Stone to Lowell House, and that is why we are glad he is here tonight to share his views in this forum. 28 years after President Kennedy's assassination, Oliver Stone's film has wrought one sweeping change. The question of who killed President Kennedy and why can no longer be credibly avoided. But even more than that, the film and the question of truth surrounding the events of November 22, 1963, draw a line of parable at that date and pose a second, larger question. That question being, what kind of nation have we been? What kind of nation are we now? And what kind of nation do we seek to become? Oliver Stone, through Jim Garrison's figure played by Kevin Costner, makes his argument forcefully and then faces us and looks us straight in the eye, saying, it's up to you. Thank you, Professor Kalb.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. I understand that some of you have been here since 1:30 this afternoon. And you deserve a hand from those of us who have not been here since 1:30. So good for you. You've been an absolutely marvelous audience, and you've now seen the movie, the JFK movie, and it's long, it's powerful, and you know that it's very controversial. And we're delighted that the director, Oliver Stone, could be with us tonight and talk to us. Mr. Stone is one of this country's top filmmakers, having done, among other movies, The Doors, Born on the 4th of July, and Platoon. He's won many awards, 3 times the Academy Award. That says something about his talent. Mr. Stone is a native New Yorker, a graduate of the NYU Film School in 1971. Before that, he served in Vietnam. It's my pleasure to introduce Oliver Stone.
It feels like theater houses in the French Revolution.
Make yourself at home.
Where's Robespierre here? He would come from Harvard. Can you hear? Can you hear? Listen, I flunked out of Yale, so give me a break. This thing is not attached, by the way. This thing is not quite attached. That's okay. Now it is. Having.
Now look, this is not Hollywood. This is a university.
Having come east, loaded for bear, I took the privilege of bringing with me 3 people that have helped me very much on this movie. I would just like to introduce them to you before this discussion begins. First is Colonel Fletcher Prouty. I asked Fletcher, who is not as young and healthy as he used to be, to accompany me up here to the north because I wanted you to see that there is a real person who exists, who is the character of X, and it was based mostly on Fletcher, who worked in the Pentagon during those key years from 1961 to 1963 as the Chief of Special Operations with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it was Fletcher who told me many of these revelations that you saw in the movie tonight. Next to him is Major, John Newman, who is a military historian, and he has a book coming out in February that has played a key role in my understanding of this situation, and it is called JFK and Vietnam, and it will be coming out in February from Warner Books, and it is essentially John's doctoral thesis, which he has been working on for the last 15 years. And next to John is Jane Rusconi, who straight out of Yale, actually, at a very young age, performed incredibly as my chief researcher, knows more about the Kennedy assassination, I think, than David Bellin even. And I go to her constantly for reminders because there's so much material here to hold within one's grasp over a period of 2 years. Jane has performed remarkably services to this movie. I would just like to make some preliminary remarks. I've been accused by a number of people, some of them journalists, of a distortion of history. And if there is any common thread of attack running through claims of those critics of JFK, it is a notion that somehow there is an accepted and settled and respected and carefully thought out and researched body of history about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. All of which I have set out deliberately to subvert, using as my weapon the motion picture medium and taking as my target the impressionable young who will believe anything, quote, as long as it is visual, unquote. This, quote, distortion of history charge has come at me from all quarters, although almost entirely, it must be said, from people old enough to know better. And it ignores deliberately and carefully the fact that there is no accepted history of these events, and that terrible times remain the most undocumented, unresearched, unagreed upon, non-historical period of our history. One can read in history books the standard 2 paragraphs that John F. Kennedy was shot by a lone gunman, who in turn was killed by another earnest vigilante and another lone gunman, Jack Ruby. End of story. But that theory, put forward in 26 unindexed volumes by the Warren Commission from the day it was issued, was never even believed by a majority of Americans, and the number of people who disbelieve it increases each year. Are we really to believe that settled, agreed, sanctified history includes that Lee Harvey Oswald rode away under an easy-to-trace alias for an inaccurate mail-order Italian rifle, called by the Italian army the humanitarian rifle, because it never killed anyone when deliberately aimed, when he could have anonymously bought an accurate weapon at any street corner in Dallas without giving his name? Is it sacred history that this semi-literate high school dropout from Fort Worth, Texas, professing Marxism, was taken into a secret, highly trained Marine unit at an air base where the U-2 flights originated, given courses in the Russian language, and then permitted to leave the Marine Corps on 3 days' notice on a trumped-up claim of illness of his mother, who, by the way, his mother, days after his death, was the first to make the claim that her son was working for American intelligence? Is it settled history that he then defected to the Soviet Union with a request for travel that included a reference to an obscure PhD's only graduate institute in Switzerland? Are we to believe it is now history not to be disturbed except by people like me that he then went to the United States Embassy in Moscow, announced his intention to defect and to turn over U.S. secrets to the Russians, and was permitted to go his way? Is it part of our history which cannot be touched that he then returned 18 months later to the same U.S. Embassy, announced his intention to resume American citizenship, and was handed his passport and some funds to enable him to return home? Must one be a disturber of the peace to question the history they say that says he was met by a CIA front representative when he returned to the United States? That he was never debriefed by an intelligence organization, although 25,000 tourists that year were so debriefed? Must one be a distorter of history to question why he then merged into the fierce anti-communist white Russian community of Dallas, although he kept up the absurd front of Marxism? Or the equally rabid anti-communist circle of Guy Bannister in New Orleans? Or how did Oswald just come to have the job a few weeks before at the book depository, overlooking the precise point in the motorcade where Kennedy's car took that crazy, unusual curve at 11 miles an hour? Or how Oswald came to be spotted by Patrolman Baker only 90 seconds after the 6th floor shooting on the 2nd floor, having a Coke and showing no signs of being out of breath? Or the neat stashing of the rifle without prints and the 3 cartridges laid side by side neatly at the window? Am I a disturber of history to question why Allen Dulles, who was fired by JFK from the CIA, which JFK said he would splinter into 1,000 pieces, why was Mr. Dulles appointed to the Warren Commission to investigate Mr. Kennedy's murder? And so on, and so on, and so on. To accept this settled version of history, which must not be disturbed lest one call down the venom of leading journalists from around the country, one must also believe the truly absurd single bullet theory of the Warren Commission, which holds, of course, that 1 bullet caused 7 wounds in Kennedy and Connolly, breaking 2 dense bones and coming out clean, no metal missing, no blood tissue, anything on it. Its path utterly ludicrous. I think you saw it in the film tonight. It went in Kennedy's back on a downward trajectory, changed direction, exited up through his throat, paused for 1.6 seconds before deciding to attack Connolly, then turned right, then left, then right again, hitting Connolly in the back of his right armpit, heading downward through his chest, taking a right turn into his wrist, shattering the radius bone, exiting his wrist. The bullet launches one last assault, takes a dramatic U-turn, and buries itself in Connolly's left thigh. Later, that same bullet turns up 5 miles from the scene of the crime on a stretcher in a corridor at Parkland Hospital. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is not history. This is myth. This is myth. It is a myth that a scant number of Americans has ever believed. It is a myth that has sustained a generation of journalists and historians who have refused to examine it, who have refused to question it, and above all, who close ranks to criticize and to vilify those who do. So long as the attackers of that comforting lone gunman theory could be dismissed as kooks and cranks and the writers of obscure books that would not be published by reputable publishing houses, not much defense was needed. But now that myth is under attack by a well-financed and, I hope, well-made motion picture with all the vivid imagery and new energy that the screen can convey. Now, either enormous amounts of evidence have to be marshaled in support of that myth, or else those who question it must be attacked. There is no evidence, so the attack is on. Some journalists of the 60s are self-appointed keepers of the flame. They talk about our history, and they fight savagely those who would question it. But confronted with the crime of the century with no motive and hardly any alleged perpetrators, they stand mute. Where in the last 20 years have we seen serious research from Tom Wicker, Dan Rather, Anthony Lewis, George Lardner, Ken Auchincloss into Lee Harvey Oswald's movements in the months and years before November 22, 1963? Where have we seen any analysis of why Oswald, who many say adored Kennedy, alone among assassins in history, would not only deny his guilt, but claim he was a patsy? Can one imagine John Wilkes Booth leaping to the stage of Ford's Theater, turning to the audience and shouting, "I didn't kill anyone, I'm just a patsy"? One might ask of the journalists who have suddenly emerged as the defenders of history, what is their sense of history? How much work has the sage of Bethesda, George Will, done in the 20 years he has been a columnist to try to uncover the answers to some of the dark secrets of Dallas in '63? Will Tom Wicker and Dan Rather spend their retirement years examining closely the possibility of a second or a third gunman? Or will they content themselves with savaging those who do? Why is no one questioning Richard Helms, who lied to the Warren Commission when he said the CIA had no knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald, when we know now there was, as of 1960, an increasingly thick 201 file on Mr. Oswald? Or why is no one asking for the files of Operation Mongoose, which may be at the very heart of this conspiracy? Or why does no one mention J. Edgar Hoover's memo of 1960 outlining the fact that someone was using Oswald's name while Oswald was in Russia to buy trucks for the Guy Bannister operation in New Orleans? Why are none of these reporters questioning Colonel Prouty in depth, or historian John Newman, or Marina Oswald Porter, who says her husband was working for something bigger, or question the hitman Charles Harrelson in Maximum Security? Let them deny what they will, but at least ask them. There's more truth-seeking going on now in Russia than there is in our own country. The central historical question raised by JFK, of course, has to do not with the tramps in Dealey Plaza, not with those who might have been firing from the grassy knoll, not with what coalition of mobsters, Cuban exiles, and rogue intelligence officers the conspiracy might have been concocted by, but the darker stain on the American ground in the 1960s and the 1970s, Vietnam. It is Vietnam which has become the bloody shirt of American politics, replacing slavery of 100 years before. Just as we did not resolve, if we ever did, the great battle over slavery until 100 years after the Civil War, when we passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, so it becomes clear that Vietnam remains the watershed of our time. And the divisions in our country among our people opened up by it seem to gape wider with each passing year. JFK suggests it was Vietnam that led to the assassination of John Kennedy, that he became too dangerous, too strong an advocate of changing the course of the Cold War, too clear a proponent of troop withdrawal for those who supported the idea of a war in Vietnam and later came to support the war itself. Was President Kennedy withdrawing from Vietnam? Had he indicated strongly his intention to do so? Had he committed himself firmly and against all hawkish advice to the contrary to oppose the entry of U.S. combat troops? The answer to these questions is unequivocally yes, as Arthur Schlesinger Jr. has attested, and Major John Newman, who is here, who has devoted himself to a 10-year study of this. His book, JFK in Vietnam, a major work, will be published and will surely contribute more heavily than any other volume of immediate military history to the solution of these questions. Major Newman makes it very clear President Kennedy signaled his intention to withdraw from Vietnam in a variety of ways and put it firmly on the record with the National Security Memorandum 263 in October 1963. Those who try to say it was no more than a call for rotation of troops or a gimmick, and that the Johnson NSAM 273 within a week of the assassination merely confirmed the policy, ignore the obvious question. If LBJ was merely continuing Kennedy's policies, why was it necessary to reverse the NSAM? So the protectors of Vietnam, the new wavers of the bloody shirt, keep to attack the central premise of JFK. Oliver Stone is distorting history again, they say, and suggesting that John Kennedy was positioned in this withdrawal from Vietnam. But these defenders of history had very little to say 5 years ago when it was suggested a motion picture that Mozart, in a motion picture that Mozart had not died peacefully, but had been murdered by a rival and second-rate composer. Where were all our cultural watchdogs when Peter Schaeffer was distorting history with Amadeus? The answer, of course, is that it wasn't worth the effort. 18th century Vienna, after all, is not 20th century Vietnam. If Mozart were murdered by Salieri, it would not change one note of that most precious music. But if John F. Kennedy were killed because he was determined to withdraw from and never send combat troops to Vietnam, then we must fix the blame for the only lost war in our history, for 56,000 American dead, and for an as yet unhealed split in our country and among our people. I've been ridiculed, and worse, for suggesting the existence of a conspiracy, as though only kooks and cranks and extremists suggest their existence. But this is the wrong time and place in which to ridicule people who believe in conspiracies. Is it inconceivable that a president of the United States could sit at the heart of a criminal conspiracy designed to cover up a crime? We know that happened. We would have impeached him for it had he not resigned just one jump ahead. Is it so far-fetched to believe in a high-level conspiracy involving the White House, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Air Force, and the CIA to bomb a neutral country, Laos, Cambodia, and lie about it in military reports to the rest of the country? But it happened, perhaps more than once. Is it inconceivable that the National Security Council leadership, with or without the knowledge of the President of the United States and with the collaboration of the Director of the CIA, not just a few rogues, could be engaged in a massive conspiracy to ship arms to our sworn enemy with the casual hope that a few hostages might be released as a result? But it happened. Does it offend our sense of propriety to suggest that an Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America might have regularly lied to Congress about raising money abroad to perform things the Congress had forbidden us to do? But that happened. Is it inconceivable that a campaign manager, later to become the CIA director, negotiated with a foreign country to keep American hostages imprisoned until after a presidential election in order to ensure the election of this candidate? We shall see. But I think no one thinks it is out of the question anymore. So when JFK suggests that a conspiracy involving elements of a government, people in the CIA, people in the FBI, and perhaps people associated with the Joint Chiefs, all in the service of the military-industrial complex, might have conspired to kill John Fitzgerald Kennedy because he was going to change the direction of American foreign policy, is it not appropriate at least to look there for evidence? What was Allen Dulles really up to in those months? Or Charles Cabell, also fired by JFK, or his brother Earl Cabell, the mayor of Dallas? Thomas Jefferson urged on us the notion that when truth can compete in a free marketplace of ideas, it will prevail. There is as yet no marketplace of history for the years of the Kennedy assassination and immediately afterward. Let us begin to create one. What I have tried to do with this movie is to open a stall in that marketplace of ideas and offer a version of what might have happened as against the competing versions of what we know did not happen. I am happy to say, based not only on the 9 million people who have already seen the movie, but on the attitude towards the facts they take with them away from the movie, that our new stall in that marketplace of ideas is doing a very brisk business. And we expect by the time this film is played out that another 50 million Americans will have seen and will have a little more information on their history. I'm very proud that JFK has been part of the momentum to open the previously closed files in the matter of the assassination of John Kennedy. Congressman Louis Stokes of Ohio, who chaired the committee, has announced his willingness to consider the opening of the files of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, closed so far until the year 2029. And I'm hopeful his consideration will ripen into approval. In addition, Judge William Webster, formerly the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and of the CIA, has indicated his strong opinion that all the files, House Committee, CIA, FBI, military intelligence among them, be made public, a proposal I was extremely pleased last weekend to see endorsed by Senator Edward Kennedy. In the meantime, we are grateful to Congressman Stokes, Congressman Lee Hamilton, Judge Webster, Senator Kennedy, and others who have indicated a willingness to consider opening these files. Now, if only the Army and Navy intelligence services will join suit, it is my hope the American people will finally have the full truth of this assassination. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Stone. The way we normally structure these evenings is the speaker finishes, and then I point out that there are 4 microphones set up, 2 down here and 2 up in the balcony. And if you'd like to ask questions, please move to the microphones and I will recognize you. And why don't we start with you right up there in the balcony, please.
Okay. Mr. Stone, first of all, I'd like to say that I really enjoyed your movie. It gave me a lot to think about. My question for you centers around the consistent theme in your movie was that we should seek out the truth. But I was really disappointed when I read in Time magazine, it said that of many of the people that Jim Garrison used in his testimony, that they had failed a polygraph test when they discussed their testimony. And I was wondering if you could comment on that and clarify that for me.
Thank you.
I think Garrison is the most discredited individual in American history in recent memory. He has gone down a memory hole. I think the equivalent, if you've studied Russian history, would be Stalin's non-person usage. People like Bukharin and Trotsky disappeared. They became non-persons. I've heard so many attacks on Jim Garrison, and I've checked out the facts as far as I could get them, and so has Jane, and I am telling you that this is an incredible story. This is one journalist keeps on citing the next journalist as to polygraph tests and as to bribes. There was a white paper done attacking Garrison. It was so one-sided, it was so filled with lies that Garrison petitioned the FCC and got a half-an-hour rebuttal on TV, and I urge you to one day look at that tape because it is a brilliant, brilliant 1/2 hour of Jim Garrison talking directly to the camera and stating his case. The 2 witnesses that accused him of bribing witnesses were subpoenaed by Garrison and refused to make the same statement under the guise of law. They only did it on a television, probably for money, because I think that NBC had a definite interest in discrediting Jim Garrison. He had a good case. He had a decent case. He went to a grand jury with 12 jurors. They said go to trial. He went to a 3-judge panel, and they said go to trial. During the course of the years in which before the trial occurred, he lost some of his main witnesses. People like David Ferry died. Guy Bannister died. Lee Oswald was dead. Jack Ruby died before he could go to retrial, which he was scheduled to do. Jim's subpoenas on Helms, Cabell, and Bissell were all denied by the Justice Department. He tried to bring back 4 different witnesses from 4 different states, and the governors of those 4 states denied his extraditions, which had never happened to him before. I think that Jim had a lot of the same problems in a way that Larry Walsh had trying to prosecute the covert apparatus in this country in the 1980s with Oliver North and Richard Secord. It is very difficult to go after a covert intelligence operation in this country. I would like to point out that the jury, although they acquitted Shaw, all, when they were polled, said that Garrison had convinced him that there had been a conspiracy. Garrison, by the way, did make the summation. He was there and made the summation, and 80% of the speech that is in the movie comes directly from Jim's summation. The Judge Haggerty, after the trial, after Clay Shaw had died, on television, was quoted as saying that he believed that Clay Shaw was guilty. He also said to me personally, when I saw him years later, that he believed that Clay Shaw was perjuring himself. He did not. He lied one lie after the other on the stand. We now know, of course, that Shaw was a domestic contact agent with the CIA. We know through Victor Marchetti and Richard Helms that Mr. Helms was concerned for Mr. Shaw's fate during the trial. I could go on, but...
Well, why don't we not, because we have so many people who'd like to ask questions, and maybe we
I think that Mr. Garrison and Mr. Prouty have been the two most attacked people in this film by the press, and I'm trying to make the point, I think I have to at some length, that these people are not what they seem, and you should not believe what you read in Time magazine or Newsweek magazine, the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times. Because there was another Harvard man, Anthony Lewis, in last week's editorial op-ed column in the New York Times, who said that Jim Garrison had bribed a witness. This is a civil libertarian, Mr. Lewis, but he cannot prove that Mr. Garrison ever bribed a witness. There's no evidence of it. I objected to it, and I wrote a letter to the New York Times, and they have not printed it, as they have not printed a lot of what I've written.
Why do you think somebody like Tony Lewis would say it?
Because he's got it wrong. Tony Lewis is a big defender of David Belin. The day the Warren Commission report came out, I think, these are 20,000, how many pages, Jane? 20,000 pages. Anthony Lewis, 1 or 2 days after the Warren Commission came out, read those 20,000 pages, digested them, and told us that that was authentic. Yes.
Okay. Question. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Ask your question.
Okay, I really like the movie, and I find that all the articles against you have been character assassinations, like the GQ article. It's all really cool. And
You've got a question.
yeah, I was wondering what the Kennedy family's reaction towards the movie has been.
Honestly, I'm not involved in that. I mean, I didn't make the movie for or against the Kennedy family. I admire John Kennedy. I think the film says that and is clear. If anything, I probably went in the other direction to make him more of a hero than he was. I don't think I had time to get into all the policy differences, but I think this is a much larger issue than the Kennedy family. This concerns our country, our democracy, what it means. I'm sorry for any pain that it causes them, but I do wish in a sort of strange way that the children would wake up and do something about their father.
I was wondering, did they give you any reaction? I mean,
No, I don't think they've seen it or cared to comment. I'm very happy that Senator Kennedy is supporting the opening of the files.
thanks.
Question here, please.
Mr. Stone, besides making a great film and possibly winning additional Academy Awards, what possible good can come out of this film, considering that most of the major players are dead, we can't go back in time and prevent Vietnam, and most people, before the film anyway, did not believe the Warren Commission report?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think Norman Mailer in Vanity Fair likened it to the files to somehow leaving a new Mercedes in the South Bronx for 28 years and going back and trying to find it. All the good parts are stripped out. That's quite possible. However, sometimes when you don't find the facts, you still have to pursue them. It is a question of principle. And there is a possibility that with these files open, we may learn something that we don't even know yet, and they might lead to some other connection. I think that we must not be cynical and assume that everything has been destroyed.
Question in the balcony up here.
Yeah, Mr. Stone, I understand that you excised quite a bit of footage from this film. Could you detail what kind of scenes were deleted, and also if you plan to restore the film to its original length? And secondly, could you elaborate on the narrative style of the film? The several different film stocks used show different points of view. For instance, the 16 millimeter footage of Zapruder filming something with a 16 millimeter. Could you elaborate on how you structure the narrative?
I think that we have 4 different stories here, and that was the problem. I think speed was the essence, was the consideration, aesthetic consideration. The story of Garrison in New Orleans, the recreation of the Dealey Plaza motorcade, the Oswald story, and the deep background in Washington, D.C. Blending those 4 different themes into one story, it was difficult and required, I suppose you'd call it almost subjective cutting, that often we would cut to what Jim was thinking or what he was hypothesizing in his head. For example, when he's walking through Ferry's apartment, he imagines the possibility of Ferry being killed by pills. This, by the way, is because factually there were contusions on the inside of Ferry's mouth, which I didn't get into in the film, but there's 1,000 facts. That was part of the problem. The 4.5-hour version has a lot of juicier stuff, and unfortunately it's just too long a movie. For a movie like this has to be seen, I think, in one sitting, and I just could not expand it. So I cut a lot of things that I regret, but maybe there might be a longer version one day, who knows, if there is a Dances of Wolves type effect to the movie. Stylistically, this film stocks we used about 14 or 15. Mostly we used 35 color. We worked in 16 black and white. We used Super 8 color, which we blew up, to match the Zapruder film, because Zapruder shot in Super 8. We took the Zapruder film, we cleaned it up. It was also a very shaky film because Zapruder was an older man, and we steadied it so that you could see more detail. And we obviously we blew it up and we slowed it down in spots, and I think to allow you to see the detail. We brought several other films, I think, pieces of the Nix film, I think pieces of the Bronson film, and the Muchmore film. The autopsy scene, we built the corpse of Kennedy, but those are real photographs, autopsy photos of Kennedy, stolen actually out of the autopsy, sold, I think, by a Secret Service agent to a Kennedy researcher who passed it on to us. I think the problem, of course, is the Zapruder film stands by itself. It's the time clock for the assassination. It's the single best smoking gun we have. So we have to show it again and again to try to make the point as to what we think the timing was in the assassination, which is, we believe, is 5.6 seconds. When he comes out of the road sign at frame 210, when he starts to react to that throat wound, we think that is really the beginning of the assassination.
The autopsy stuff really necessary?
Just a moment, please.
Well, it's part of the same question, I guess, but...
I know, but there are people who were kind enough to stand in line here and ask questions, too. In the balcony, please.
Yes, your audience comes here with an open mind, and they basically want to sit here and see what you have to say, and you write a movie about truth, and I think it's therefore incumbent upon you to tell us right now specifically what is not true in the movie. There's a big mix of fact and fiction, and I want to know what happened, and because of obvious constraints of time and money, we can't all carry on our own individual investigations of JFK. So I ask you right now specifically to tell us what was not true. For example, I'd like to know, was Ferry's friend in Cuba hacked to death? That's something I'd like to know. Did people later on, were people from the Warren Commission, did they say that that depositions were filed in their names which are false? It's a very major fact you present in your film. I'd like to know if that's true. And it seems to me that anything less than a full revelation on your part right now as to what's true would be very hypocritical. So I'd like you to respond to that, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Let me clarify that you're misrepresenting my statement. I have never, ever said this film was true. I said this, always have said from the beginning, I don't know who killed Kennedy, and I don't know how. There are certain facts which are in the movie, and I can only go so far. Beyond that, it is a speculation. And if you come and you pay close attention to the movie, or see it a second time, I think the first time is suitable, it's your call, you will see that when we go to speculation, it says maybe, possibly, if, Or, as Garrison says in the courtroom, let's speculate, shall we, on the events of that day. I cannot put a prescription drug label beneath each scene and say this is actually true and this is a speculation.
Can I just respond for a second?
I'm
If I
sorry?
could just say once, this is the second time I've seen the film, and two of my specific questions I'd just like to know. Did Ferry have a friend in Florida who was killed? Question number one. I'd like that answered. Yes or no?
Eladio del Valle, as far as I know, exists. We researched it, and we found corroboration of Eladio del Valle's existence in Miami.
And was he
Ferry
killed?
talked about him,
And was he killed?
there was a police report on his death in Miami. He was hacked to death.
And how about people claiming later on that depositions were presented in their names that were false?
Who was that?
I think the woman's name was Mercer. I think it was Julie Mercer. And that was not presented in this film as a speculation. It was presented as a fact.
It is a fact.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
Jim
That.
Garrison, in his book, has a meeting with Julianne Mercer, which he describes in detail.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry? Who else? Who else? Who else? Gene Hill. Who claimed what? Yeah, Julianne Mercer's not the only one to claim that her testimony was changed by the Warren Commission. Johnny Brewer did too, and Gene Hill. But Julianne Mercer did definitely exist. In fact, Jim Garrison, I think, did a very noble thing. He did not bring her to testify because he was worried for her life. You make that point in the film, I think. The point was made in the film, I think, when he said that I'm not going to bring Julianne Mercer to testify.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Bill Ferguson. I'm the Massachusetts director of the presidential campaign of Lyndon LaRouche. And, well, yeah, I'm used to that. We've been slandered, vilified,
Wait a minute. No speech, please.
This
You
is
got
not
a
a
question?
speech.
No, no.
Yes, I have
Go
a
ahead.
question.
Ask your question.
We've been slandered and vilified for trying to expose the workings of the secret government. LaRouche is sitting in prison right now because of a conspiracy involving Oliver North and George Bush to silence our movement that's been trying to expose things like how the Kennedy assassination was conducted.
What's your question?
My question is, well, LaRouche said recently, he hasn't seen the movie, but he said that this was a very important film, that this film will play a crucial role in the 1992 election to cause people in this country
What's
to
your
reflect
question,
on what's
please?
happened in the last 28 years.
What's your question?
The secret government.
What's your
The
question?
question is, do you agree that we should create a revolution in this country where 70% of the population votes, where most of the people who've been sitting on their butts for 28 years decide they're going to run for office and not stand up and watch their leaders be assassinated, imprisoned, driven out of politics, and destroyed? Are they going to tolerate another Vietnam, another Panama, another
Okay,
Iraq?
You got a lot
That's
of
my
questions.
question.
Thank you. You want to answer that? It's yours.
Boy, you sure putting me on the hot seat here now. Well, I think I share much of your anger, and I share much of your sense of protest about where I think the covert government of this country has taken us in the last 28 years, and I do believe that it took a definite detour on November 22nd in Dallas. I don't know enough about Mr. LaRouche and what he's actually saying to really comment intelligently on it, but I do share much of your rage.
Well,
Okay,
I have
question
a
over here,
potential next
please.
script for you on the secret government.
Okay. Why don't you give it to Mr. Stone's researcher right here?
Marvin,
We got a,
can I go back for 1 second to one little thing, just to correct a footnote?
of course, go right ahead. Hang on.
I just would like to footnote something that I said earlier because I was looking for a factual support on the Anthony Lewis business at the Times. The day after the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission were published by the, Mr. Lewis wrote on the front page of the Times that the volumes, quote, overwhelmingly supported the commission report. The editorial staff took 2 whole days to digest the volumes before announcing that the evidence, quote, brings to a close the inquiry. And Arthur Kroc, also at the New York Times, called the Warren Report, quote, the definitive history of the tragedy. 3 days after Mr. Kennedy was killed, when Lee Oswald was killed, the New York Times had a headline that said, President's assassin is killed in a jail corridor by a Dallas citizen. President's assassin. He was the alleged assassin. but he was called the assassin, and I think that has much to do with the ensuing identification of Oswald as a lone gunman. That because he was killed so quickly, and it seemed to close out the affair without a need for further investigation.
The absence of the alleged might have something to do with just space and putting a headline together. Right? Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
No.
What? Well,
would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Unfortunately, or I guess in your view, fortunately, I haven't had time to read any editorials. It's finals here at Harvard. So I feel justified in asking you this question. During the making of and since the release of this movie, have you experienced either implied or out-and-out threats by the government for in the making of this movie that you can share with us?
no, unfortunately, I can't share any juicy stories about that. I do think that I think that the way this thing is done is to discredit people through the press. I think that Jim Garrison was totally destroyed in the press. And I think that if they could have, the press would have destroyed this movie and obviously my reputation. But I think that film speaks for itself, and I think the American people responded so strongly to this movie. The exit polls, the movie companies take exit polls to find out if people like the movie. I've never been higher in any movie I've ever done, more even than Platoon. So, thank you. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just trying to say that it really has been the people that have made the difference. In December 20, when this film opened, the press on this film was so bad that we could have disappeared within days at the box office, and we wouldn't even be here tonight having this discussion, to be honest. We would have had the fate of executive action in 1973. So I really owe it to the people who responded to this picture.
Are you saying the press is one?
Just a second, hang on just a second. I have a feeling that, taking just an opposite point of view on that, the press, I thought, at the very beginning, had given this such an advanced play. I thought that the press was part of Warner Brothers Studios. I thought that they were in the employ of Warner Brothers because they had done an extraordinary job of pushing a story and a film way beyond what any movie had ever got before.
I can't agree, Marvin, because it was...
Good point.
I'm a big student and fan of George Orwell, and when I saw, before anyone in the country had seen the film, Newsweek magazine had a cover that said, "You cannot trust this film." That's like a caveat emptor. It says, "Buyer beware." And
do you think that discouraged people? I mean, if the press was that bad, wouldn't it have discouraged people from going to see it?
I think the press succeeded in doing two things. Actually, one thing. It succeeded in putting in the minds of everyone who sees the movie the concept that it's faked history and suspect, and it worked, because people come up to me and say, "Great movie, bad history," because they believe Time and they believe Newsweek. And we haven't, I hope happens in places like Harvard and Yale and so forth and so on, is that honestly we get into a serious reassessment of our history and what Kennedy was trying to do between 61 and 63. There is an area of debate. Arthur Schlesinger talks about my premise is defensible. Newman's book talks about it. There's a lot of obvious evidence of Kennedy being a Cold Warrior, and that should be debated. But don't buy into this thing that LBJ just replaced Kennedy after a tragic car accident in Dallas and did the same things that Kennedy was doing. And I hope that this film helps to spark that debate.
Well, it
Excuse me, just a follow-up.
Is there a question up in the balcony now? Do you have a follow-up?
Harvard. This is Harvard. Yes, so am I correct in assuming then that you're not facing any outlandish tax audits or anything else from the government as a result of you releasing this film? There's nothing governmental that you can that you're alarmed with that you can share with us, or that was frightening in the course of making this film? No governmental pressure. You spoke of press pressure, but was there any governmental pressure?
No, I've never had cooperation from the government on anything. On Platoon, they wouldn't... as a matter of fact, on Platoon, we gave them the script. They said, "Will, we're not going to help you with this movie. We're not going to give you any military equipment, but we will help you rewrite it so that it's correct and reflects the real attitude of the soldiers in Vietnam." And they sent me some red line notes as to what I could do with the script to improve it. I relied on the Philippine Army and military equipment instead, U.S. Army. On Born on the 4th of July, I had the same response. And on JFK, he wouldn't even show it to them. I think, how did we get the Lincoln Memorial? I forgot. I think we told them we were from Guatemala or something. I forgot.
Okay. Question in the balcony, please.
Yes, this marks the third time I've seen the movie, and I like it better each time.
Thank you.
My own greatest interest in the whole affair involves the cancellation of President Kennedy's authorized directives for the withdrawal from Vietnam. And I've been studying a copy of the National Security Action Memorandum number 273 in conjunction with the essay and elaboration about it by Professor Peter Dell Scott in Berkeley. And I'd like to congratulate Major John Newman for the piece, the op-ed piece in the Globe 2 days ago. It was an excellent discussion of that. My question is, I wonder if Colonel Prouty could address this question. It pertains to a passage from Major Newman's op-ed piece on Tuesday in the Boston Globe, in which reads that President Kennedy never saw NSAM 273 because it was authored the day before the assassination. And my understanding is that on that day, President Kennedy was en route to San Antonio. My question is about the draft of National Security Action Memorandum dated November 21st, 1963. If Colonel Prouty could elaborate, please, on the significance of the manner in which the language was altered between the draft on November 21st and its final version on November 26th. Also, at what point did this document come into your knowledge, come to your attention, and by what process was it declassified? As I have a copy also of the draft, it was declassified this past January 31st of 1991.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like Fletcher to just answer that, and maybe John, you could back it up afterward if...
It's an excellent question because it needs as much research as it can get. I worked intimately with Major General Krulak, who attended, and I can show you the record in government printing office material from Foreign Relations papers, over 50 meetings between August and November 22nd, 1963, that involved President Kennedy and usually Secretary Rusk, McNamara, General Taylor, who was General Krulak's boss, and mine. And the thrust of those meetings was that President Kennedy was not going to build up forces in Vietnam other than the Vietnamese forces. He would build them, take all U.S. personnel out of Vietnam by the end of 1965. That little material made a headline in the military newspaper, Stars and Stripes, that was around the world. It was no secret. So that's where Kennedy stood, and those of us working on those papers, I wrote much of 263. If you can find it in the Gravel edition, good. Read it, of the Pentagon Papers. It is in the JFK Library. You can get it there. But be careful how you read it, because most places where it is kept in the files, it is not a document from page 1 to page 20 without some interruptions. You have to read it carefully. Now, when the President's cabinet went to Honolulu on that strange meeting, when so many cabinet members were on the way to Tokyo on the 22nd of November, the day the President was killed, the night before, according to Arthur Schlesinger and many others, the plane with Mr. McNamara and Mr. Bundy, who was Mr. Kennedy's advisor in the assistant in the White House, flew back to Washington. Somewhere on the 21st, including the time of that flight, and you know if you come from Hawaii back to Washington, you're losing a lot of hours of the day, Mr. Bundy says that he worked on a first draft of this NSAM 263. I have a record of him saying that in a letter that is dated 1991. I'd be glad to make it available. How that language appeared in that memorandum, which is brief, one page and a little bit of another page, that really is contrary to the basic points of 263, is still quite a mystery. I also have a paper dated November 21st, 1963, in which Mr. Bundy, George Bundy, in the White House, sends his draft to his brother, Bill Bundy, in the Pentagon, where we were, asking Bill Bundy to study this and to present it to McNamara for McNamara's review. Kennedy was alive at that time, you know, but this paper was a little bit different. The paper finally published as NSAM 273, and those papers must not be discounted. Those are the top papers this government prints with the president's approval in the era of Kennedy. There are other designators for different presidents. That paper was signed by Johnson on the 26th of November, 4 days after Kennedy died. The interesting thing is there's a significant difference between the thrust of 263 in the draft on November 21st, and there is another significant difference between the draft that Mr. Bundy says that he tried to write and then sent to his brother for approval, which is a normal process. You send it to many people, and the document that Johnson signed. This is no place to elaborate further, but whoever asked the question, you are right on the crux of the matter. Did these people know something when they wrote that memo about Kennedy's death? Or was this a natural proposal for the change of some actions? Or, as some people say, 273 wasn't much of a change anyway. For those who have doubts, go to March 1964 and read Johnson's NSAM 288. And with that, we escalated in Vietnam, and my friend went over there and saw a lot of service over there.
John, can you please say a few words about this, if you'd like? Thank you.
The question of the NSAMs is a technical one, and there's not enough time to go into it tonight, so I'm going to address specifically the question, which was the differences, can we hear, between draft 273, dated 21 November, and the final version of that NSAM signed by President Johnson. And it is true that that draft version was declassified in January of this year. There are two other pieces of paper that pertain to that draft, which have marginalia of Mr. McCone and I believe Mr. Hillsman that are still classified, and Ed Tatro, who's over here somewhere, and along with myself, have FOIA requests in for those documents. We'd like to see them very much. Here's what we know about 273. 273 really has its roots in the Honolulu Conference that Fletcher just told you about on the 20th. That conference was extraordinary in that the proposals that came out of it were rather escalatory with respect, in comparison to what Kennedy had in mind, certainly escalatory considering 263, which directed the beginning of the withdrawal. Now, George Bundy, who I interviewed at length for my book and on this subject, discussed with me why there is a difference between the 21 November version of 273 and the final version. There are some small differences, but the major difference between those two documents is this. Honolulu discussed U.S. actions against North Vietnam. There was a big argument over that. William Colby was opposed to that. Mr. McNamara was for it. Mr. McNamara had his way. And the proposals that came out of Honolulu were reflected in that NSAM, and they called for those actions. But George Bundy understood that John Kennedy was against direct U.S. action in Vietnam, had always been against that, but had been a proponent of South Vietnamese actions against the North. Therefore, the draft version of that NSAM, which when you look at it and look at the paragraph which contains the provisions for increasing covert actions against the North, there is a proscription against, or actually there's a restriction to using only South Vietnamese resources. McGeorge Bundy put that restriction in there. He and whoever else crafted that early draft to try and bring those proposals into line with what they thought the president might approve had he the chance to see that document. When NSAM 273 was published, was signed by Johnson a few days later, that restriction was removed, as were a few other words. And it opened the door wide for direct U.S. action against North Vietnam, led to the DeSoto missions and on down the line to the Gulf of Tonkin. And NSAM 288, which Fletcher talked about, put a lot of that more formally in place. But NSAM 273, the final version, represents a major escalation in just 4 days from the draft version, which was prepared while Kennedy was still alive.
Thank you very much. This is a question for you, sir. We've been going for a little more than an hour, and I don't want to tax you beyond what you can tolerate. So there are obviously a lot of people who would like to continue, and if you want to add another couple of minutes, it's up to you.
It's up to, would you like to continue?
Question here.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Koppel. I'm Vice Chair of the Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for sparking an interesting discussion and a lot of thought. My question relates to a question that was alluded to earlier regarding the distinction between conjecture and fact in the film. Now, I may be a real dolt, and the friend sitting with me too, but I had a hard time telling what was conjecture, the placement of maybes and let's suppose is notwithstanding, what exactly was based on pure conjecture, what was partial conjecture, what was postulation, and what was in fact real footage of real events. It was just simply difficult to tell at times. It goes by quickly. It may be easy for you because you're a filmmaker and you had a clear intention. My question relates to a broader theme. Clearly the film has a political objective, clearly has a message. We're clearly supposed to be left with certain feelings at the end regarding the government's behavior, at least in that one incident, perhaps on a broader scale. Hi, my name is Jonathan Koppel. I'm Vice Chair of the Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for sparking an interesting discussion and a lot of thought. My question relates to a question that was alluded to earlier regarding the distinction between conjecture and fact in the film. Now, I may be a real dolt, and the friend sitting with me too, but I had a hard time telling what was conjecture, the placement of maybes and let's suppose is notwithstanding, what exactly was based on pure conjecture, what was partial conjecture, what was postulation, and what was in fact real footage of real events. It was just simply difficult to tell at times. It goes by quickly. It may be easy for you because you're a filmmaker and you had a clear intention. My question relates to a broader theme. Clearly the film has a political objective, clearly has a message. We're clearly supposed to be left with certain feelings at the end regarding the government's behavior, at least in that one incident, perhaps on a broader scale. Is there a problem as a filmmaker, as a spokesperson with a political aim, in using poetic license to craft a very effective political message? Because it seems like the two are distinct, yet you mix them together. Certainly, this would relate to your Amadeus analogy. Peter Schaefer didn't have a political objective when he was saying that Salieri may have been responsible. You certainly have a political objective in claiming that there was a government conspiracy. You certainly have a political ideology that's coming through your movie. And I was wondering whether the use of artistic license in this instance betrays your political mission, and whether it's appropriate, in fact.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a question that's best answered by film historians. I mean, I can't go over with you every single image and place. I mean, I have said, for example, that Mr. X, Fletcher Prouty, never met with Jim Garris. He met with me. But I do argue that Jim Garrison was reaching more or less the same conclusions that Kennedy was trying to wind down the Cold War, and that was the reason he was killed, that Mr. X told me. So I took the liberty and dramatic license of having X meet with Jim. That's one case in point. Obviously, you know that the DA staff was larger and more amorphous. There was no woman DA. I have written about that. I put a woman DA in and took license. I've composited several characters. There was Perry Russo gave the main testimony that Clay Shaw went to a party with David Ferry. He's an insurance salesman. My character's in jail, so I don't think I made Perry look better by any means. But that was because there were three characters. There was David Logan and Raymond Broshears, who also made linkages, those key linkages. So I wanted to put a movie having a time limit of 3 hours. I took the liberty of combining three characters into one. Arguments in real life take much longer. I think that ultimately, as a dramatist, I do have the right to take dramatic license. You say that it's propaganda, and I suppose that this is an argument that will be in existence for the next, as for the life of the film. I don't choose to see it as propaganda. I think that it was conceived as I call it a counter myth to the myth of the Warren Commission. Because I only have a certain amount of facts, and beyond that, I have to go with speculation. Therefore, it is a myth. And I hope, as Norman Mailer said, it's superior myth to the myth of the Warren Commission. But we have to go over it on a fact-by-fact, point-by-point, ad hominem basis, I suppose, to get to the bottom of your question. I cannot answer it except in broad terms at this point.
Well, the bottom of the question would be, is it appropriate to use that dramatic license on a subject of this nature? Whether or not I feel it's propaganda, you're clearly portraying
Let's take a vote.
Point of view.
Let's take a vote. Do I have that right? And who says I don't have that right?
The question isn't really a question of right. It's a question, is it appropriate?
Quick question. We got a lot of people.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I think the point is made, and I don't think that anybody's questioning.
I'm making a point. I want to address the question.
I think
I'm not trying to be contentious.
I don't think there is an answer. I do think that E.B. White said that democracy is the recurrent suspicion that more than half the people are right more than half the time, and I think this is what we end up with, is that as you see, I think that more people feel that it's right. I can't give you a hard answer.
Question there.
Yeah, Mr. Stone, I'm over here.
Right over here.
Hi.
How can I see with these lights anyway?
In the beginning of the film, you briefly mentioned that Robert Kennedy was on the Warren Commission, and you also mentioned that, and you also talk about how the Warren Commission was basically appointed to cover up the assassination. So, I mean, from me, I'm a young person, and my version of history has just been completely distorted by this film, because it contradicts almost everything I learned in high school. I'm not taking either. I'm really questioning it now. Why would Robert Kennedy try to cover up his own brother's assassination?
Welcome to the world. Robert Kennedy was not on the Commission.
That's something that
I don't know where you got that
learned
information.
before.
It's not in the movie.
What is John
Candy says, why didn't Robert Kennedy investigate it? He was his brother, for Christ's sake, and he was the Attorney General at that time.
Okay.
It's a good question. It's been asked of me frequently, so I really wish I had dealt with it more in the film. But Robert Kennedy, according to several people, including Frank Mankiewicz, who's still alive and working with us and was his press attaché, Robert Kennedy was in deep shock and grief over his brother's death, was really incapacitated. But you have to keep in mind that President Johnson, a few days, shown in the movie, within the assassination, appointed the Warren Commission, which railroaded all other investigations. There was one brewing in Texas, and there was another investigation apparently brewing in the Senate. But by appointing the Warren Commission, everything became unified into that one. And Mr. Kennedy, I think Mr. Cal will attest that Lyndon Johnson did not like Robert Kennedy very much. In fact, I think Robert Kennedy's balls were cut off the moment that his brother was killed, and he soon resigned as Attorney General, I think within 5 months, and was replaced. But he did say, 1 week before his death, in a college in California, when asked by a student such as yourself, if he were elected president, which it looked like he was going to be, would he reopen the files, and would he reopen the investigation on his brother? And he answered, yes, I would.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. It's getting on in hours, and it's very late. You've all been fantastic. So arbitrarily, I'm just going to say 2 more questions, okay?
Sure.
That'll be all right? And from the balcony, so those of you down here, sorry. 1, 2, and that'll wrap it. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Stone, I thought it was a very courageous piece of work and visually outstanding. But was secrecy and security especially an issue with the script or the filming of this movie?
Well, it was. But obviously we are not very good spooks in the film business, because our script was stolen. The first draft was stolen right out of the Xerox room, and it was circulated all over the country. Every single media organization had a script of it by the end of the day. And it was the basis of the articles and the allegations in the Washington Post attacking the film while we were still shooting the film. We were shooting, by the way, the sixth draft when they were dissecting and analyzing and criticizing our first draft. And this has never, I want to point out, has never been done to a film or a work of art, as far as I know, in recent memory.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask...
Outrageous.
I'd like to say it's certainly Oscar worthy, but is it going to be an Oscar winner? Winning an Oscar it adds certain weight to a film, obviously, and because of political connotations in this film, do you think that would shy off the voters from dealing with it?
You know, we shall see, but I would never underestimate the intelligence of the American people, and I've gotten away with that by not doing so. And I think the Academy voters are old. Many of them are older people. They lived through this time. And as Jack Lemmon said on television the other day, we know it's a lie. So I think we got a lot of sympathy from older people in this matter.
I also like to finish up. I know I've been long. Just one sentence. I liked the autopsy. I know there's a question about it, but I liked it, and I thought it was necessary.
I'm glad. Can we go on to the next
Can I
question?
say why? I'm almost done. You have one more question left. I know I've been long. I'm sorry. However, but...
Who is the most crucial question? Who is the most urgent question?
Your most urgent question on my mind right now? I just wanted to say that I liked the autopsy. I thought it was necessary. I know why you did it. And another thing, one more thing, and I'll quit. I'll quit. It's a sentence. One sentence. I'll quit. Okay. Now you didn't make a documentary. You made a docudrama, and drama implies dramatic license. That's why you had to make certain changes. I mean, I think that defends you. You can't make it just straight without that dramatic license.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Last question up here. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Stone. You included in your film the two other assassinations, the one of Martin Luther King and the one of the other Kennedy, and the other Kennedy brother. And you decided through your film, and you discussed how we should look further through the assassinations and look for not a final answer, but more conclusive answer. Could the same be done in the same with the aura that surrounds the Kennedy family, involving maybe Marilyn Monroe, and whether or not it was a drug into not suicide, but maybe a cover-up for the Kennedy clan or Kennedy involvement?
I think the point of the question is whether at the end of the movie you make the point about Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King. Could the same effort be made toward them as has been made toward the JFK?
Well, you know, you have to, I think you need a sense of humor to look back on the 60s and realize that the three most progressive leaders in our country, three men who were opposed to the Vietnam War, are all killed by lone nuts. I think there is quite a brisk business in the lone nut industry. And I think we must in America really look at these three assassinations as possibly being linked and triangulated.
Well, let me just wrap it up here, please. I think that this has been an extraordinary evening at the Kennedy School.
Does Mr. Stone really want to adjourn this meeting?
That this has been able to be done. Could we just...
Can we continue this meeting if Mr. Stone would like to?
Well, why don't you invite Fletcher and John to come up and discuss not only NSAMS, but discuss the entire Vietnam withdrawal process. Discuss 1961. Discuss Laos. Discuss Cuba. Very important, Laos, as John points out. Invite Richard Helms. Invite William Colby to come up and have a debate with these gentlemen. I think that would be that would advance the issue. Thank you. You've been very, very kind audience, and I think a very supportive one. Thank you.